This time on ZFs Garage, we're going to take a look at my 1982 AMC Concord and see if we can get it to daily driver status. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get started. Now, ever since I've owned this car, it's had a lot of issues going down the road. When you come to a stop, it always wants to shut off, so you're always kind of two-pedaling it to keep it running. It has no pickup, it breaks up under acceleration, it really only sits still and idles well, and when it does, it's very rich. This carburetor, I'm pretty sure, is the main culprit. I've got the idle screws turned almost all the way in after cleaning the carb, going through it to make sure everything is set up correctly. It's still having issues. I think replacing this carb might be the best idea. Now, I've ran the numbers on this carb, and it's actually for a 1979 Concord. I'm not sure exactly what the differences are between a 79 and an 82, but I do know this isn't the right carburetor for this car, and I really don't think it was set up properly when they switched to it. There we go. Oh, hey. That shock is almost not a shock anymore, or at least the bushing isn't. The 4.2s that I've come across on the few AMCs I've owned all had this crappy little plastic valve cover. It's held down by 2 bolts, and they always leak. Unfortunately, when I sold my 84 Eagle, I sent a steel replacement cover with that car to the, he was the original owner of that 84 Eagle. So I sent him that steel cover with it, and in this moment, kind of regret it, honestly. This is the old carburetor, little bitty fella. Now this has a tag on it here, ND2918. So I did look that number up, and like I said, from what I found, it's meant for a 79. And I have been unable to get this carburetor to act completely right. I've gone through all of the jets, I've had the venturis out, cleaned everything out, pulled the float, made sure it's adjusted the choke blade, everything in this carb. And I cannot get it to act right. So, out with the old garbage, in with the new, hopefully not so garbage. Oh, yes. There she be. This is not a true Motorcraft. This is a Chinese knockoff of a Motorcraft 2150. So it's a 2100 series carburetor. This is what you would have seen on a late 70s Ford with the 302, and I believe it came on some of the 351s as well in this platform here. This has the 1.14 Venturi in it. I wanted to get the 1.08 Venturis, but unfortunately the Chinese website did not have any 108s. So I figured 114s should be fine. Now, the main concern I have with this, other than obviously that, which I do have an adapter on its way for. It's due in tomorrow, but for now, we don't have it. The other problem, as some of you may already be aware, If you're familiar with the 258 out of the Wranglers or AMCs, you'll know that this throttle linkage comes back and down on these, whereas on these it kind of just comes back. The mount for it is very forward, so I need to adapt this to have a linkage back here somewhere. It needs to be about here. So what I think I'm going to do there is I ordered this little T-bracket from a local hardware store, and I am just going to try to sneak it on like that, something to that nature anyway. I do have 2 of these T-brackets, so I'm going to go ahead and modify the bracket to try and make it work with the carburetor as it sits before I go cutting anything off of the carburetor throttle linkage. So as you can see, we've got this little groove cut out in the T-bracket, and that's going to slide down over that little barrel and sit just like this. We'll have to locate a hole in the throttle bracket of the 2150 and put a bolt through it, and then this will be able to be adapted to the Concord throttle linkage. I'll take this guy here, put it on, and now we can make a mark for where that guy is going to go. Perfect. That'll work. While we wait for the carburetor adapter plate so we can begin working on getting that together, I'm going to go ahead and pull all of the ignition out. We won't be using that coil anymore or that distributor, and most of the wiring is going to come out also to remove the ignition control. So I'm going to go ahead and get that pulled out in preparation for the HEI unit that should be here tomorrow. I think that I might have robbed these spark plugs out of the Eagle, if I'm not mistaken. Pull the distributor cap off and bar the engine over to get it on top dead center number 1, so that we can then drop the HEI unit straight down into place. And get everything set up. What's crazy is I literally just put this coil and this rotor cap and distributor cap and everything on this car, and here I am taking it right back out again. I believe that's top dead center. Number 1, compression stroke. And there's the distributor. Here we have all of the parts we're going to be using. This is the carburetor adapter plate that I ordered. I got this on eBay. I found a link to it in one of the chats from a Jeep page, since the early Jeeps also had the 258. This is a pretty popular swap with those. So I was able to source this. This was actually the last one at the time. I'm sure they'll be making some more. I'll put a link in the description to this adapter. just from looking at it, it looks like it's going to be pretty good. I think it should match up well. The shape of it matches the bottom of the carburetor spot on. It's got all the recesses for the bolts where they'll bolt on well. It also comes with all the gaskets that you need to adapt that carburetor. So we'll be going with that. I also picked up this Edelbrock air filter. It'll go right on the carb. It's a cheaper one, but it'll serve its purpose. We've already looked at the carburetor, and then we have the HEI style distributor here. So we'll be throwing that in, getting it timed up, figuring out how exactly we're going to wire it, and we'll be ready to rock and roll. Get our adapter plate. Go ahead and start 2 of the bolts through the plate with the gasket on. Make sure that the longer tangs are towards the front. Here. There we go. Linkage hooked up here. See how it's gonna work out. Oh, that's like perfect. I'm gonna have to figure out a spring. Not too terribly big of a deal. Go ahead and hook up our fuel hose. Now, something that is critical when installing a distributor is to pay attention. This meshes into your pump, your oil pump. When we're installing the distributor, we have to make sure that the oil pump slot that is down inside of that hole right there lines up with this. Now, as you drop the distributor in, it's going to rotate some, so you pay attention to your gears. It's going to come in, it's going to rotate a little. So you don't want to try and set it in directly in line. You want to go a tooth over and try and get it lined up. You can see that this tooth is almost lined up with the top of the tooth above it. So that's how much it's going to flex. So you actually want to put it in a little bit off from your mark so that it'll rotate into place. Number 1 cylinder is going to be there, so we're going to start it about here. Oh, nope, too far. There it is. Beautiful. And we'll go ahead and put our little clamp on. Now, I'm not going to tighten this clamp down yet. I'm just going to put it on tight enough that it'll put a little bit of tension on this distributor. So as we're setting the timing later, I'll be able to kind of fine tune it without it slipping. So we're just going to snug it down a bit. Yeah, there we go. Put our cap on. I didn't go through trying to video how I wired this up because it's really hard to see. Now, it's really simple. Like I said, I set everything up. Number 1 is top dead center of compression stroke. Number 1 cylinder is facing this way because that's where number 1 should be according to the firing order of the AMC 258. Now, what I did right in here, let me get a little light, is our ignition controller, that box right there. You can see it under all the wires. I took my meter and I started probing these plugs. Well, actually probing the plugs over on this side of the harness over here. And the one I wound up pulling the wire out of is this one right here. So this plug with the green and the yellow had 12 volts on it with keyed ignition. When I shut the ignition off, it goes back to nothing. So I spliced that and just ran a little spade connector. And right underneath this box here, you can see here it says BAT. I hooked that up. It also has a spot for a tachometer. This car doesn't have a tachometer, and I really doubt I'll ever put one in it because I just want to drive it. So that is how it's hooked up. Now, I did have some issues. I decided to test crank it without the camera running and had a little bit of trouble with it. Wound up having to just kind of turn this back and forth. When you turn the distributor cap, you're going to advance or you're going to retard the timing. I had to play with it a little bit to get it to finally fire up and had to crank a long time to get enough fuel into that carburetor for it to fire. So now we don't have the fuel linkage hooked up because the spring that I need, and I have to make a little bracket for that return. Otherwise, you can see it here. Let me try and do this. It just kind of stays. So, not great. So we are going to go ahead and fire it up. So we're running. I'm going to let it warm up to operating temp, bring the RPM up to about 1,000 and hook up my timing light and see where the timing is. Now, the timing on this should be somewhere in the 8 degrees before top dead center. I'm not 100% that's where this one's going to fall, but that's where we're going to end up setting it for starters, and then we'll start kind of tuning. So we've got the engine up to temperature. I honestly think this thing's going to be pretty close off the rip, but we're going to go ahead and try and dial it. We're at 730 RPM now. I've got my amp clamp hooked up to my number 1 plug wire. So let's go ahead and bring this up to 1,000. Timing marks are just right here. Let's go ahead and so right now it looks like we are at 2 degrees after top dead. So we're going to go ahead and adjust that. Alright, so now, I don't know if you can really see that too well. You can kind of see a blip going, and that shows us being at 8 degrees before top dead center. We're right around 1,000 RPM. I think we're good. how the pickup is. Here, we'll wait till we get to this straight stretch up here to do it. Yeah, let's see. Oh yeah, that's so much better. That's going to do it for this episode of ZFs Garage. We've got the carburetor and the new ignition system in the car, and over the next couple weeks I'll be doing some tuning to those to make sure this car is driving the way it should. Now I don't know what the future holds for this car yet. It might get a V8 swap, but none of that will happen until we're done building the Eagle. If you have something neat you'd like to see done to this car, please leave it in the comments below. If you like my content, make sure you like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future projects like this Concord or our Eagle build. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time.